Hello, I am here today to show you how to use your Google or Microsoft platform to develop collaborative group projects that challenge students to use their language output skills. My name is Athena Jimenez, and I am a 7th year bilingual education teacher. I hope you find this presentation helpful. I'm going to start by showing you some student samples of work and then walk you through the steps I took as a teacher to guide students through these awesome projects. This first project was completed individually, and there was a lot of work before we went into this final product. So in this project, students researched the culture of one Spanish-speaking country or region, and then they had to create a sway presentation on the cultural elements of that country. From there, I wanted students to have some extra practice with sway, so students went on to plan a trip to this country. The trip that they planned included flights, lodging, and made sure to include cultural, historical, and touristy and adventurous sites to visit throughout their trip. In each sway, students included pictures as well as descriptions and pricing for their trip. Another sway practice activity was that we did research projects and practice writing essays in sway format. So in this sway, students added some of their own audio, images, and then their different paragraphs. This strategy for presenting research and essays was done several times so that students would continue to practice. In this example, students also used audio. This can be done in sway. So for this group project, students were tasked with adding components to a classic fable. Some students drew on paper and then took pictures and uploaded them. We added names to our characters. We added dialogue to our new characters. And we added a new conclusion to our fables. This was the first collaborative group remote learning project that we completed together. Now that we've practiced audio projects and now that we've practiced group projects in a remote setting, students were able to go into Flipgrid, which is one of my personal favorite tools, and create videos based off of a certain topic. So to practice with Flipgrid, first we tried something easy, 2 truths and a lie. Students were able to add 2 truths and a lie, and other students could reply to them, so trying to guess which one was the lie. After we had some practice using and replying on Flipgrid, then we put all of our components together and created video presentations. Flipgrid gives you an option to screen record, so you never have to even show your face. And what was fun about this is that a lot of students began to offer feedbacks and reply. Algo nuevo, something new that they learned. And buen trabajo, good feedback. My goal today is that you end this presentation with a better idea of how to effectively apply student choice in remote learning projects, that you learn how to use Flipgrid for language production, assessment, and collaboration, and that you are able to apply these techniques for increasing student engagement and accountability in remote learning. Whether you use Google Classroom or Microsoft Office, these steps are for you. What is Google Classroom is Microsoft Teams. What is Google Docs is comparable to Microsoft OneNote, and so on and so forth. Whichever platform you use is adaptable. My school currently uses Microsoft, so I will focus on Microsoft applications, but when possible, I will provide the Google equivalent. Projects can take a lot of time, but they are often worth the learning that students experience and the products that they produce. You will want to set up instructions for selecting groups, explaining the project, additional resources, and designing a rubric that fits with your project. You may complete these setup steps in any order. I usually start with the project instructions or with the rubric. For the sake of this presentation, I will go in the order that students receive the information, which is the order that I listed on this slide. So we will start with group selection. Where can we set up group selection? To set up group selection, we will need to create a table for your students to fill in. If you are using Microsoft, I use the collaboration space of OneNote to do this. If you are in Google, I have in the past used an editable, shareable Google document to create a table. Now, I teach middle school, so I make sure to remind students that we are only changing our own names and nobody else's. You will want to provide very clear instructions when providing students the opportunity to select their own groups. In order for you to provide clear instructions, you will need to identify your ideal group size and maybe be a little flexible with this, especially depending on your age group. You will need to assign group roles and group tasks as a way to keep each group member accountable for collaborating with others as well as completing the project. I do this by setting up a table, like the one you see here, and I write one simple line of instruction. Select your group. There must be 2 to 4 students in each group. Then I make sure to provide very clear subheadings. An example is also helpful, especially if this is the first time you are doing this. As you can see here, each group member has a teamwork task as well as a performance task. I make sure that I walk through how to use this table step by step with students and then monitor it over the course of the next few days or hours. Eventually, students will fill in their own names and they will have selected their own responsibilities. Way to give students a lot of choice right at the beginning. Please note, you are welcome to change the roles in here to whatever else may fit your classroom. In addition, this is not the only way to set up grouping tables. Another way to set up group selection could be by topic. In this case, I have listed the title of the fable, and students were able to select their own groups based on the fable. What I also added into this table was another column so that students are able to just turn in their sways to that column. In my experience, it doesn't matter as much how you set up your groups, but I have noticed that students do tend to switch groups every so often just because they want that own different experience for themselves. Next up for your project setup are the project instructions. This is what I give to students after I have explained how to select the group. You can do them in either order though. Your projects should be clear and concise. Whenever possible, keep your instructions to 1 page or less. Be clear on what it is that you want students to do, and be sure to repeat several times what it is they will be doing. I would even suggest reading the key instructions to the students, or possibly reading all of the instructions with frequent pauses for questions or clarification. Especially in a remote setting, it is so easy to lose attention for just a moment and end up missing a whole lot of information. So when possible, repeat, pause for clarification, And it might even be helpful to ask questions to the group such as, so how many pictures do you need to include? Where can you find these instructions? Where else can you find these instructions? Speaking of instructions, the instructions should be accessible from multiple places whenever possible. If you are operating on Microsoft, I typically post the instructions in the Assignments tab in Teams, as well as in OneNote, and sometimes I even email out the instructions. Going back to what is it that you want students to do, whenever it is possible, you should provide or show examples to students of something similar to what you want them to do. Even if the examples are from in-person learning and you are hybrid or remote now, we all do better when we have a visual of what is expected of us. And finally, you really want to make sure that you've considered all of the instructions and written everything down and you are ready to go when you are presenting this to students. Making changes to your instructions after you've already given them can often challenge or confuse students. If you're operating on a 50-minute class period, I would stop right here. Students have already received a ton of new information. They will be selecting groups, and now they will be processing this project. As homework, assign students to self-select their groups, reminding them that we only change our own names and nobody else's, and also remind them that if they notice one group is small, invite them to join your own group. You can also assign them for homework to go over the instructions and come back with questions. While many students may not do this, some students will, and their questions will likely lead to additional questions from others. Don't underestimate the power of having students ask questions. Okay, so here is an example of some project instructions. On this list, all I did was write down the required elements for a research project about an animal. When starting out with projects, I suggest keeping it simple. Before getting into multi-step, multi-day remote projects, try simpler ones. For this first remote project, I only had students create a Sway presentation because I knew that they knew how to operate Sway because we had practiced it in person. If you have not experienced Sway yet, then just have your students work on PowerPoint. Sway can be a little clunkier or a little different from Microsoft PowerPoint, so do what's easiest for your students. As you move forward with remote learning, and if you have had a successful first project, then you can start thinking about adding different components. For my second remote learning project, and this one happened after students had already practiced using Sway and Sway Audio. For my second remote learning project, I had students not only create their presentations in Sway or PowerPoint, they also needed to make a presentation via video on Flipgrid. I will explain a little bit more about that in the next slide. But again, go slow. Introduce new and extended components to students gradually. What you will see that is different on this assignment sheet from the previous one is that there's more information. Here I have the learning targets at the top. I have the basic project. Select the classic fable and discover the moral. Reimagine your fable and create a Sway. The steps, very simple. Select your group. Read your fable with your group. Figure out 2 to 3 morals of the story. Complete a Microsoft form. This is where I added another component. Students read their fable and then created a Microsoft form that asked them what their fable was, what the moral of their fable is, and what piece of the project they will be responsible for. Then they were to divide their work and create their sway. So the work that students needed to do for their actual fable was illustrate a comic with 5 boxes or more. Create or add dialogue between the characters. Name the characters and add an introduction or conclusion to the fable. And then somebody needed to create the sway. For each of these work steps, students have a job to do. On the bottom part of this instruction sheet, I added what was required to turn in after week 1 and what was required to turn in after week 2. I made this a checklist and I made sure to highlight the turn-in date so that everything was very clear. Again, clarity is key, especially in remote instruction. The next step in planning or in presenting this to your students is to consider what they will be using to complete their project. Since I teach a language class, I want students using their target language as often as possible, and I need to be able to hear them. So I usually opt for PowerPoint, Sway, or even Flipgrid for audio practice. If you are in Google, you can use Slides and Flipgrid as well. When I was ready to add a component to the way students complete projects, I had them, quote, present, unquote, their projects by speaking alongside their PowerPoint or Sway. Flipgrid has a screen record option that allows students to only record their screen. After students submit their presentation, you can have them reply to each other's presentations with feedback, but one step at a time. The jump from submitting a PowerPoint to presenting it on video is a large one. Students did not begin to reply to each other's Flipgrid presentations until several weeks, many weeks, after their first exercise in Flipgrid, which was 2 truths and a lie and reply. To students, the last piece of what you will show to students is going to be your rubric. I tend to favor rubrics and try to use them as often as possible. I find them to be one of the more objective ways for grading. So when considering a rubric, I think about what it is that I am grading for. What am I assessing? What was the purpose of the project? In some scenarios, I grade for completion, organization, and/or timeliness. In other situations, I may want to assess language use, and so I might include a category on correct subject-verb agreement, vocabulary usage, or proper language usage. There are other times I include an individual contribution grade to try and keep all students accountable for a fair grade. Whatever your categories are, decide on them and have a rubric ready to show your students. Personally, I like and would recommend, but it is up to you, a 4-3-2-1 scale. A 4 means that the project is superior and exceeds expectations. A 3 means that it is excellent and it meets expectations. A 2 is good, approaching expectations, and a 1 means that it needs improvement or is below expectations. Whenever possible, provide examples for what a 4, 3, 2, or 1 would look like. If examples are not available, provide descriptions of what a 4, 3, 2, 1 would look like. In remote instruction, I do allow students the opportunity to redo their work. That is up to your discretion. I hope you have found this presentation helpful and hopefully picked up a few tips on how to set up remote learning collaborative projects and how to use new tools in doing so. I welcome you to connect with me with questions, feedback, or other comments at my email address below, athena1189@gmail.com, or on LinkedIn at Athena1189. Thank you for watching my presentation today.